I never expected my own family to turn on me the way they did. It still plays in my head like some kind of sick joke, a bad dream that refuses to fade. One moment, I was part of them, carrying my share of the weight, and the next, I was nothing but an inconvenience to be tossed aside. It happened so fast, so casually, that I still catch myself wondering if I missed the signs. Maybe I had been blind to the cracks forming all along. I'm Lucas, 28, and up until recently, I lived in my childhood home with my parents, Greg and Lisa, and my younger sister, Taylor. It wasn't the perfect setup, but I made it work. I had a steady, though not glamorous, job in graphic design, paying enough to keep me afloat but not quite enough to justify moving out just yet. My parents always insisted that family sticks together, that we support each other no matter what. I believed them. I wish I hadn't. For years, I pulled more than my share of the weight, groceries, bills, even house repairs when things inevitably started falling apart. The house itself was a relic from the past, a structure barely holding together under layers of neglect. My dad, a man who prided himself on being the provider, hadn't held a job in years. My mom, well, she spent money like we had it. Meanwhile, Taylor, my 26-year-old influencer sister, floated through life as if she had been born to be taken care of. And guess who was left covering the gaps? Yeah, me. It wasn't that I minded helping. I wanted to believe we were in this together, that my contributions mattered. But that illusion shattered the moment I realized my place in their lives was conditional. It all started on the morning of my birthday. I had woken up with this small, stupid hope that maybe this year would be different. I never expected grand gestures or extravagant gifts. Just some acknowledgement, a simple happy birthday would have been enough. But the house was eerily quiet. No decorations, no murmured plans in the kitchen. Just the familiar, suffocating air of indifference. I found my mom in the living room, scrolling through her tablet, her expression unreadable. "Morning," I said, testing the waters. She barely glanced up. "Morning." That was it. No mention of the date, no warm smile, nothing. I tried to shake it off, but the disappointment settled deep in my chest. "So, I was thinking we could do something tonight," I ventured, keeping my voice light. "Maybe just dinner together? Nothing big." She sighed like I had just asked her to move mountains. "Lucas, we've got plans tonight." I blinked. Plans? Yeah, Taylor's friends are coming over. It's an important networking opportunity for her. Networking. Right. That was their excuse for every meaningless party she threw. But on my birthday? I clenched my jaw, forcing a nod. Got it. No big deal. I should have known then. I should have seen what was coming. But denial is a funny thing. It lets you believe in possibilities that don't exist. The real shock came later that afternoon. I had spent the day out, distracting myself with work, responding to kind messages from friends who actually cared. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, my stomach knotted at the sight before me. My things, every last belonging I owned, scattered across the front lawn like discarded trash. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I threw open the car door. My laptop bag, my clothes, even the small gifts I had given my family over the years, all tossed carelessly into boxes, some overturned, items spilling onto the grass. My mom, Dad, and Taylor stood on the porch, watching. Just standing there like this was some kind of intervention. Like I was the one who had done something wrong. What is this? My voice came out hollow, the disbelief thick. My dad cleared his throat, shifting his stance. "Lucas, it's time." "Time for what?" My breath hitched. "What the hell is this?" "You need to move out," my mom said, her voice void of emotion. "We've given you long enough." Long enough? I had carried this house on my back. I had been the only one making sure we didn't drown in debt. And now, I was just being discarded? Taylor crossed her arms, her lips curling in that signature smirk that made my skin crawl. "You're almost 30, Lucas. Normal people have their own places by now." Normal people? Right. Normal people didn't get blindsided by their own family on their birthday. I looked at my father, hoping for some kind of contradiction, some sign that this was a cruel joke. But he only sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's for the best, son. We need the space." The space. The same space I had helped pay for. The same space that had never been an issue until now. I swallowed down the lump in my throat, my fingers curling into fists. "You're seriously doing this today? On my birthday?" Mom's eyes didn't even flicker. "Consider it a gift," she said smoothly. "Independence." I had never felt rage like that before. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease with which they had done it. Like I had never mattered. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at them, waiting for something, anything, that would make this make sense. But no explanation came. They had made up their minds, and I was nothing but an afterthought. So, I did the only thing I could do. I clenched my jaw, forced myself to breathe, and turned back to my car. I started loading my things, one box at a time. My hands trembled, my vision blurred, but I kept moving. Because if I stopped, even for a second, I knew I would break. No one offered to help. No one said a word. They just watched. When the last box was in, I turned to face them one last time. My voice was steady, but my chest burned. "You'll regret this." Taylor rolled her eyes. "Sure, Lucas." I didn't say another word. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The second I turned the corner, the weight of it all came crashing down. My grip tightened on the wheel as my breath came in ragged gasps. I had nowhere to go. No plan. Just a car full of my belongings and a suffocating, gnawing emptiness inside me. Happy birthday to me. The cheap motel smelled like stale air and regret. The flickering neon sign outside cast distorted red and blue shadows across the walls, making the whole place feel like a crime scene from an old movie. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself this wasn't real. That any second now, I'd wake up in my old bed, and my life wouldn't have been turned upside down. But the ache in my chest told me otherwise. The first night was the hardest. I didn't cry. I refused to give them that power, but the silence was unbearable. The only noise was the hum of the mini-fridge and the occasional muffled argument from the room next door. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through my phone, but every notification was just another reminder of the people who hadn't reached out. Not my parents. Not Taylor. No one. It was as if I had never existed to them. By morning, my emotions had hardened into something else. Not sadness. Not despair. Something sharper. Determination. If they wanted me out of their lives, fine. I was done being their safety net. The first thing I did was throw myself into work. I had always been good at what I did, but now I had something to prove. I didn't take breaks. I didn't stop to breathe. I worked until my fingers ached, designing projects for every client I could find. I reached out to old contacts, picked up freelance gigs, and pushed myself harder than I ever had before. If I wasn't sleeping, I was working, and it paid off. Within a few weeks, I had stacked up enough money to leave the motel and rent a small apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but it was mine, the first space that truly belonged to me. I stood in the middle of it on the first night, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Then, the unexpected happened. I had just finished a long day, barely keeping my eyes open as I scrolled through emails, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another work notification, but when I glanced at the screen, my blood turned to ice. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. Lucas, it's me. I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse quickening. Taylor. She let out a shaky breath. Yeah. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to. What the hell did she want? Look, she continued, her usual arrogance absent from her tone. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. I leaned against the counter, pinching the bridge of my nose. You mean like how it was so important to kick me out on my birthday? She sighed. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But this isn't about that. I stayed silent, waiting. Then, she said something that I never saw coming. Mom and Dad are in trouble. I scoffed, shaking my head. And that's my problem because they could lose everything, she said, her voice breaking. Dad lost his job, and Mom, she racked up so much debt they're on the verge of bankruptcy. They don't have any money left. They might lose the house. I blinked, caught between disbelief and something I couldn't quite name. After everything they had done, after the way they had tossed me aside, now they were the ones suffering? I almost laughed. Almost. And let me guess, I said slowly. Now that they need something, suddenly I exist again? No, Taylor rushed to say. It's not like that. I don't know what to do, Lucas. I thought you should know. I leaned back against the counter, exhaling through my nose. This was rich. The people who had abandoned me were now falling apart. The poetic justice of it all should have satisfied me. But it didn't. Instead, it made me feel nothing. They made their choice, Taylor. My voice was steady, cold. And now they get to live with it. She was quiet for a long time. Then, almost whispering, she said, Yeah. I figured you'd say that. The call ended. I set my phone down, staring at the wall. I thought I would feel victorious. I thought I would feel something. But all I felt was tired. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just wound you in the moment. It lingers, twisting itself into your thoughts, resurfacing at the worst times. Even after weeks of living on my own, their voices still echoed in my head. My mother's cold dismissal. My father's silence. Taylor's smirk. And now, out of nowhere, my sister had called, expecting me to care. For days after her call, I wrestled with the information. Dad out of work. Mom drowning in debt. The house, the same one I had practically kept standing, hanging by a thread. They had used me, discarded me, and now that they had no one left to lean on, they were suddenly desperate. I should have felt some kind of satisfaction, but all I felt was exhaustion. I drowned myself in work again, pushing harder, making sure I never had to rely on anyone but myself. It worked. My client list grew. My reputation as a designer skyrocketed, and soon, I wasn't just getting by, I was thriving. One night, I had just finished a long project when my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but something in me, curiosity, maybe, made me answer. Hello. A hesitant pause. Then a voice I hadn't expected. Lucas, it's Dad. I felt something in my stomach tighten. It had been months since I last heard his voice, and now, here he was. Just like Taylor. Just like I had predicted. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. What do you want? A heavy sigh. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. Glad we're on the same page. Another pause. I could hear the weight in his breath, the hesitation. My father wasn't the type to admit when he was wrong. And yet, here he was, calling me, the son he had stood silent against, the son he had let be thrown out like garbage. We made a mistake, he finally said, his voice rough. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped your mother. I let out a bitter laugh. And yet, you didn't. I know. He sounded tired. And I'll have to live with that. But Lucas, we need help. There it was. The real reason for the call. I shook my head, pacing my apartment. Unbelievable, I muttered. You're only saying this because you're out of options. If things were fine, I wouldn't even be a thought in your mind. That's not true, he said quickly. Save it. My jaw clenched. You didn't check on me after you threw me out. You didn't call. Not once. And now you think you can just reach out and I'll come running? He was silent. Probably because he knew I was right. I exhaled sharply. No. Lucas. No, I said again, firmer this time. I don't owe you anything. Not after what you did. You can figure this out on your own. A long silence stretched between us. I could hear the weight in it, the realization sinking in for him. He wasn't getting what he wanted. Finally, he let out a slow, defeated breath. I understand. I didn't respond. I just ended the call. For a long time, I stood there, phone in hand, staring out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, cars moving through the streets below, life continuing without pause. I should have felt relief. But instead, all I felt was the ghost of what could have been. I shook my head, setting the phone down. It didn't matter anymore. I had my own life to live. And they weren't a part of it. Days turned into weeks, and I did what I had promised myself. I moved forward. I buried myself in work, taking on bigger projects, building a name for myself in the design industry. The sleepless nights and relentless hours were exhausting, but they kept me focused, kept me from thinking too much. Because whenever I let my mind wander, it always found its way back to them, to the people who had once been my family. The silence from my parents and Taylor should have felt like closure, but it didn't. It felt like waiting for a storm to break. And sure enough, the storm came. It started with small things, messages from distant relatives I barely spoke to, vague comments on social media about family always being there for each other. Then came the whispers from old family friends, people who never gave a damn about me before, suddenly reaching out, testing the waters. I ignored them. But then, one evening, just as I was shutting down my computer after an exhausting day, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I checked the peephole, my stomach twisted. Taylor. I should have ignored it. Should have let her stand outside and waste her time. But against my better judgment, I opened the door. She stood there, arms crossed, looking as put together as ever. But there was something off in her expression, something hesitant. What do you want, Taylor? I asked, keeping my voice flat. She glanced past me, taking in the apartment like she was assessing its worth. You're doing well for yourself. I resisted the urge to slam the door in her face. Yeah, I am. without any help from you. She sighed. Look, I'm not here to fight. Then why are you here? She shifted on her feet, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Mom and Dad, they lost the house. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I blinked. What? They lost everything, Lucas, she repeated, her voice quieter this time. The bank took the house. Dad still hasn't found a job, and Mom, she exhaled sharply. Mom refuses to admit she's at fault for any of it. She's still acting like the world owes her something. But they have nowhere to go. I stared at her, trying to process it. The house, the one I had poured money into, the one I had kept afloat for years, was gone. I should have felt something. Anger, satisfaction, pity, but I felt nothing. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. And Taylor frowned. And I don't know. I just thought you should know. I narrowed my eyes. That's it. You're not about to ask me to let them stay here. She hesitated just a second too long. I laughed bitterly. Wow. Of course. That's why you're really here, isn't it? Lucas. No, I cut her off. Not a chance. After everything they did to me? After everything you did? She flinched. I know what we did was wrong. I scoffed. Do you? Because it took this for you to show up here. Not because you care, but because now you don't have anywhere else to go. She swallowed, but didn't argue. I shook my head, stepping back. I'm done, Taylor. You all made your choices. Now you have to live with them. She stared at me, her jaw tight, like she wanted to fight back. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked away. I watched her go, waiting for the guilt to creep in, waiting for that old, familiar weight in my chest. But it never came. Because for the first time in my life, I knew. I didn't owe them anything. For the first time in months, I felt free. Truly free. No longer weighed down by the guilt, the expectation, the invisible chains that had bound me to a family that never really saw me as one of their own. Taylor's visit had only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't sorry. They weren't looking for reconciliation. They were looking for a way out of their mess, and I wasn't going to be their lifeline. Days passed, then weeks. I poured myself into work, securing deals with clients I once thought were out of my league. My reputation was growing. People were starting to notice me, not just as some freelance designer, but as a creative force. My bank account reflected the effort, and for the first time in my life, I was in control. Then, out of nowhere, something happened that I never saw coming. I was at a cafe, sketching out concepts for a new project, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another client request. But when I glanced at the sender, my heart stopped. Greg and Lisa Reynolds. My parents. I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around my coffee cup. Part of me wanted to delete the email without reading it. Another part, the one that still carried the ghost of the boy who once wanted his parents' approval, couldn't help but open it. The message was short. Too short. Lucas, we need to talk. It's important. Please. We're sorry. That was it. No details. No explanation. Just those few words, like a desperate plea. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to Mike. Mike, wow. That's rich. I'll look into it. See what they're up to. I knew better than to believe their sudden change of heart. My parents had always been strategic in their apologies. If they were reaching out now, there was something else at play. Mike didn't take long. 2 days later, he called me, his voice laced with something between amusement and frustration. Guess what I found? I leaned back in my chair. Let me guess. They're trying to scam me somehow. Close. He chuckled dryly. They're trying to get your home declared as a family asset. I almost dropped my phone. What? They're claiming that because you used to contribute financially to their house, you owe them. That your new success was built on the foundation of their support, and that legally, they have a claim to your property. I laughed, loud and sharp. My success? Built on their support? Are you kidding me? Not kidding, Mike said. They're trying to get a lawyer involved. It's weak as hell, but they're hoping you'll be dumb enough to fall for it. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling beneath my skin. They had kicked me out, discarded me like I was nothing, and now they wanted to come back and take what was mine. Let them try, I said, my voice cold. They'll get nothing. Mike was silent for a moment. You know, you could take legal action first. Shut this down before it even starts. I exhaled, rubbing a hand down my face. What do you suggest? Restraining order, cease and desist. Hell, we could even sue for emotional damages. They have no legal ground, But if they keep this up, it could be a headache. A part of me hesitated. This was my family. A broken, toxic family, but still. Then I remembered standing in front of that house, my belongings dumped on the lawn. The cold, detached way my mother had told me to leave. Taylor's smug grin. My father's silence. They had made their choice. I had made mine. Do it, I said. Burn the bridge. Mike didn't hesitate. Consider it done. As I hung up, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of losing their approval. Not of the past. I had one. And I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me ever again. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Mike didn't waste time. Within days, cease and desist letters were served, followed by an official restraining order. My parents had no legal footing to stand on, and deep down, I knew they must have realized it. Still, they tried. For weeks, I heard through distant relatives that my mother was ranting about how I had abandoned my family in their time of need. My father, as always, kept silent, probably too ashamed to admit that he had let things spiral this far. And Taylor? She stayed quiet, but I knew better than to think she was done trying. Then came the final nail in the coffin. One afternoon, as I was reviewing designs for a major client, my phone buzzed again, this time, a text from an unknown number. Taylor, you win. That was it. Just 2 words. At first, I didn't understand. But later that evening, Mike called me with the final update. They're done, he said simply. Your parents tried to fight the legal orders, but their lawyer took one look at the case and told them to back off. They have no options left. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. So that's it. That's it, Mike confirmed. They can't contact you. They can't come near your home. And if they try anything else, they'll be facing serious legal trouble. A strange silence stretched between us, the weight of everything settling in my chest. I should have felt relief. Victory. Instead, all I felt was nothing. Because in the end, there was no real winner here. I had lost my family a long time ago. I just hadn't realized it until now. Lucas. Mike's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Yeah, I said quietly. Thanks, man. For everything. Anytime, he said, and I could hear the unspoken understanding in his tone. He knew this wasn't just about legal victories. He knew the scars ran deeper than that. After we hung up, I stared out my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. For the first time in my life, I had no strings holding me back. No guilt. No obligations. Just freedom. And it was mine to do with as I pleased. The months that followed were the quietest I had ever known. Without my family hovering over me like a storm cloud, I was left with only my own life, my own choices. And for the first time, I didn't have to answer to anyone. No more guilt weighing me down. No more feeling like I owed something to people who never truly valued me. At first, it felt strange. I had spent so long fighting, proving myself, waiting for the next betrayal, that when it was finally over, I didn't know what to do with the silence. So, I built. I poured every ounce of energy into my work, taking on projects that excited me rather than ones I felt obligated to accept. The promotion I had worked so hard for was just the beginning. I started freelancing for high-profile clients, expanding my portfolio in ways I had never imagined. Then, one day, an opportunity knocked that changed everything. It came in the form of an email. A major tech firm, one I had admired for years, had seen my work. They weren't just offering a project. They were offering a full-time creative director position, a 6-figure salary, international opportunities, everything I had ever dreamed of. I stared at the email, rereading it over and over. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. No hesitation. No fear. I responded, setting up an interview. And when they offered me the position, I took it without a second thought. A year ago, I would have run to my family, telling them the news, seeking their approval. Now, I didn't even think about it. This was mine. A few weeks later, I packed my bags and left the city behind. My new life began in a sleek high-rise overlooking the skyline of a place I had only ever dreamed of living. It was the kind of home I never thought I'd have, a space filled with light, with possibility, with freedom. One night, as I settled into my new apartment, I found myself scrolling through my phone. For the first time in months, I searched for my parents' names, wondering what had become of them. There wasn't much. Taylor had moved on, still caught up in her influencer lifestyle, though her posts felt emptier than before. My parents had faded into the background, no longer the force that once loomed over me. They were just people now, people I used to know. I set my phone down, staring out at the skyline, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I had spent so much of my life believing that I needed them, that I owed them, that no matter what they did to me, I had to hold on. But I didn't. I had let go, and I was finally, truly free.